Another week of competitive and entertaining Overwatch League action is in the books, and as strange as it is to say, we've already almost reached the first tournament of this season, the May Melee, with the first knockout round starting this Sunday following the conclusion of the qualifiers at the end of the week. Continuing on from the last week though, today I'll be discussing the next instalment of my Overwatch League 2021 Team of the Week after receiving a lot of positive feedback on the last video. Before we get stuck into it though, I do want to quickly reiterate how I put together this Team of the Week. Again, this lineup isn't just made up from players from the best teams, and won't be too influenced by the IBM Watson power rankings. Instead, I'll be selecting the 7 to 9 players who impressed me the most with their displays at their respective roles over the course of a weekend. Whilst of course some of their players will be involved here, this stops this Team of the Week being just a mix of Houston and Philly players, whilst also allowing the top performers from sides that may have lost one of their matches to still be involved if they deserve to be. Hopefully that all makes sense, but if there's still any confusion, leave me a comment and I'll try my best to respond to it. Also I want to again shout out Dan Konya, who's also doing his own Team of the Week video series at the moment, and did this last year as well. His channel is linked down in the description below, be sure to check him out. Without further ado then, let's get into my second OWL 2021 Team of the Week. And this time I think I'll start with the support line, where we have our first 2-time Team of the Week recipient, Crimzo. Crimzo, like the rest of his teammates on the Houston Outlaws, has enjoyed a brilliant start to the season, with his impressive performances during week 1, rightfully earning him a spot in last week's Team of the Week. This week, however, I found his displays to be even more impressive, albeit against weaker opposition, as Crimzo showed just how important and crucial he has been towards Houston's success. On Ana in particular, his impact was always notable, keeping DJango alive throughout his aggressive engagements, or taking the initiative himself, with 3-man or sometimes even more Bionades being a constant feature of the 2 series against Paris and London. He also made some highlight sleep plays, including the key one that embarrassed Suna on Volskaya. His quality on Baptiste should be mentioned as well, with consistently good immortality field timing, alongside an incredible display of primary fire accuracy, with Crimzo often lighting up the kill feed with a string of 2 or 3 kills. The flex support position is always one of the strongest position groups in the Overwatch League, and this year again we are already seeing a number of players make their mark at this position. So far though, with only 1 or 2 exceptions, no one else has shown the ability to take over a game from his position in the same way Crimzo has at times, and for that reason I believe he has to make a return to his Team of the Week for a second week in a row. Alongside him however is one of the other top flex support performers in the league right now, that perhaps was unlucky to feature last week, and that is the Philadelphia Fusion's Alarm. After his fantastic rookie season last year, we all knew that Alarm was one of the best supports in the game, but despite the Fusion's off-season visa problems that resulted in Alarm having to form a new support line with Toby, this man hasn't missed a beat. One of the highlights I'm sure many of you saw from this past weekend was his incredible sleep onto Jinmu's Pharah, who subsequently fell into the well on Ilios. But that play alone honestly wasn't hugely significant, and only gives us a very small idea of how impactful he was to Philly's great 2-0 week, which included a massive win over Chengdu, and continued their unbeaten start, firmly cementing the Fusion as the team to beat in the East. Crucially, he played the pivotal role of enabling Carpe to pop off, whilst also doing an excellent job in keeping his tank line healthy, as well as applying pressure during teamfights himself, with some key picks or by shutting down enemy flankers. Simply put, it was another brilliant weekend for Alarm, and whilst I just about got away with excluding him last week, this time I was left with absolutely no choice, hence his inclusion this time round. Having discussed Alarm though, it makes sense to now move on to the damage starters, and first of all talk about Carpe, who like Alarm left a profound impression on the past weekend of action. He was another who had every right to be selected a week ago, and followed up a great start to the season with some displays this week on McCree against Chengdu and Hangzhou that were just phenomenal. I want to specifically look at the series against the Hunters, which pitted the best 2 APAC teams right now against one another, and was shaping up to be a very competitive contest. Carpe from minute 1 however took over, and backed up by Alarm, put in by far the most commanding McCree performance we've seen against any team so far this season. Chengdu's great Pharah comps that had proved so successful till then, and I'll touch on them later, was simply eviscerated by this madman, who popped off harder and louder than a bowl of Rice Krispies. After a rather quiet 2020 and following all the off-season changes, Carpe was singled out as a player that had to step it up this year if Philly wanted to really achieve the success they've been chasing for so long now. And so far, on the back of his most recent matches, he's firmly reasserted himself as one of the best DPS players in the league, and as such is fully worthy of a place in this week's Team of the Week, not forgetting also the fact he joined the 10k elimination club as well. My second damage selection to pair with him is a player whose inclusion might be a bit of a surprise to some, as I've gone for the Dallas Fuel Sparkle. Of course you can point to some of his flashier highlights on heroes like Doomfist and Genji, especially against Boston, which brought some great moments, but personally I really want to focus more on his Tracer play, on which he has shown some of the biggest improvements made by any player from his 2020 season level to this year. Last year his Tracer was honestly a bit of a throw pick, and couldn't even stand up to less than average competition. But after clearly spending a lot of time practicing over the off-season however, it's brought a completely new dynamic to his game, and given Dallas far more flexibility on certain maps and compositions. Alongside Fearless, for me Sparkle's been one of the team's biggest carries, consistently performing at a high level, and often keeping the field competitive against what has been some generally really tough competition in the likes of Houston, LA, and this past week, Washington. Yes, he's not always been perfect, with some poor blink timing due to his inexperience on Tracer getting occasionally punished. But even in spite of this, I thought Sparkle definitely stood out as a key member of what looks like a really good fuel side, and that's why I felt inclined to feature him here. Lastly we come to the tank role, and given that I mentioned him just a moment ago, I think it makes total sense to begin with Fearless, another player who returns for Team of the Week for a second consecutive time. If you want to talk about early MVP contenders, with the emphasis here on valuable, then Fearless has got to be right up there with the way he's playing at the moment. Outside of Sparkle, it feels like Fearless is sometimes playing as a one-man band, with his consistently stellar displays making Dallas a side that is really keeping competitive with some of the best teams in the West. Whether on Winston or Reinhardt, Fearless always makes his presence felt, with a number of great Earth Shatters, as well as some excellently executed Primal Rages, particularly against the Justice, earning him the OWL record for most Primal kills in a map. I honestly can't think of a negative thing to say about his play in the moment, and even though the Fuel are sitting at a 2-2 record, I don't think either of those two losses, both to top teams, can be attributed in any way to his overall performance. I could keep going with the praise for him, but the displays for me speak for themselves, resulting in Fearless easily earning a spot here in this week's OWL Team of the Week. Beside him though is another familiar face, in DJango, who just seems to be loving Overwatch and life in general right now. The way he's playing Winston and Reinhardt for Houston at the moment without any fear and with so much confidence gives off a vibe of when Bumper was owning the world on the Titans back in 2019, with this monster always leaving his mark on each series he's played in. I don't think I really need to elaborate too much more about why he's here when he pulls off plays like you can see in the background here. And I don't think too many will disagree with his inclusion here, as DJango rounds out a disgusting Team of the Week tank line. In terms of the reserves though, I want to start with a tank player whose inclusion may come as a bit of a surprise, as it's Piggy from the Houston Outlaws. If you saw the polls I posted yesterday, you would have seen that initially it looked like Piggy would be again missing out on the Team of the Week, having overall received the least votes. Yet on reflection, I decided to change my mind and add him as a reserve at the last minute. I have to say that he's been outstanding as part of Houston's undefeated 4-0 start to the season. Particular focus has to be placed on his peeling between the front and back line, and cannot be understated, with Piggy proving to be a key piece in not only allowing DJango to thrive on the front line, but also in ensuring that Crimzo and Juby survive and are able to pop off from the back line. On Sigma especially, he's racked up some very impressive rock stuns and ultimate highlights, but coinciding with top ranking stats have established him as the best at the hero currently, and one could certainly make the argument that he's the best off tank in the game right now, and also a part of the strongest tank line. It's for these reasons that I decided to include him as a reserve here, and later on I'll explain who subsequently missed out. The other two reserves this week I think best come as a pair, as I've awarded Team of the Week honours to Jinmu and Nisha from the Chengdu Hunters. Their pharmacy partnership was honestly smurfing in the game against New York, with that performance alone arguably earning them this spot after Jinmu completely dismantled the preseason Excelsior hype, rocket by rocket. He was finally shut down by Carpe during the series against the Fusion as we discussed earlier, although I should mention that was despite Jinmu being sick and in hospital that morning. But this is when the quality of Nisha really shone through. This man was everywhere on Mercy and did an incredible job of getting reses off, more often than not in positions and teamfights he had absolutely no right being in. In many ways, a lot of the amazing success of Jinmu's weekend is owed to Nisha, who often rectified Jinmu's over-aggressive plays and mistakes with his support and use of res. And indeed, just the fact that Nisha kept on getting these off, and then getting out alive as well, just gave Jinmu even more confidence to keep on going so aggressive. In such a short space of time, Nisha has shown that he's certainly been able to fill the boots of Evator from last year, but certainly I and many others were a little concerned by heading into this season. And this past weekend especially, he demonstrated a performance on Mercy that rivaled that from Coma, which we saw from the Dragons during Stage 3 of 2019. Match that to the godly level of Pharah play, accompanied by some nice things on Torp, as well as the fact that Jinmu played whilst ill against Philly, and you have a Chengdu pair that I think certainly deserves some significant recognition, and as such there are reserve spots on this Team of the Week. As many of you will have noticed, with this week being very competitive, some really strong players have just missed out, and I just want to quickly give them an honourable mention here. On the damage front, Birdring certainly was in contention after an impressive bounce back week from the Gladiators, in which he was certainly a standout performer at Hitscan. The reason I didn't include him though was because I felt a lot of his success came as a result of very poor and undisciplined play from their opponents on London and Boston, rather than exceptional standout play from himself and the rest of LA. Perhaps this observation is a little harsh and unfair, but ultimately that's why I felt the other players were greater standouts overall. Washington, meanwhile, also narrowly misses out having some of their players like Magma Fury being involved, the former who was in this in the first place, who both enjoyed a very strong opening weekend to their 2021 campaign. The tank position though is so competitive right now, and even though they beat Dallas this past week, I would still herald Fearless's performance overall as more impressive and impactful, but perhaps next week we can see some more Justice representation in the team of the week. As always, other players from Houston and Philly were certainly considered given their perfect 4-0 starts, and as a wildcard I also wanted to give Paris's Khan some love after a brilliant performance against Vancouver. He also showed some very promising stuff against Houston, but suffered with some shaky moments at times in both series. And when competing against Crimzo and Alarm for a spot here, that's going to be a really tough ask, especially for a rookie on a weaker team. But on that note, we've reached the end of my second Overwatch League 2021 Team of the Week. These are just my thoughts and opinions though, and I'd love to hear who makes your own Team of the Week down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed though, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter or my Discord if you haven't already. Until next time though, I want to say a big thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.